Hey everybody, welcome to this edition of the Weekly Brief, moderated by yours truly, Jay Shakur. We're getting into a few of the top stories of this week, one of them dearly and extremely personal to me, given my relationship to one of the subjects of this particular story. But before we get into that story, I want to first get into talking about the Trump administration defying a court's order to essentially turn around planes deporting alleged Venezuelan gang members. I want to get into that, as well as the ongoing protest on college campuses. Let's jump right into that first story. So the Trump administration has defied, over the weekend, has defied a judge's order to turn around planes, essentially, that were deporting alleged Venezuelan gang members. Let's look at that particular story and what that entails here. Let's look at that particular story here. So that judge is now being threatened with impeachment, giving essentially the court order, and now saying, hey, one side is saying, hey, it is becoming an impediment to the executive branch. That's the dialogue that's now coming out on the right side of this issue, saying, hey, the president has the authority to enforce immigration law, and judges are essentially halting that. Let's look at this story now that they're calling for essentially the impeachment of this migrant here. Okay. Very, very interesting story. Let's look at this. And this is coming from Straight Arrow News. All righty. The full story is a U.S. district judge is facing threats of impeachment after placing a 14-day restraining order on a Trump administration bid to invoke the Alien Enemies Act. It's from 1798. Supporters of President Donald Trump claim the judge is putting the public and authorities at risk by doing this. What is the Alien Enemies Act? The Aliens Enemy Act is a law passed in 1798. It's a wartime authority that allows the president to detain or deport the natives of the natives and citizens of an enemy nation. The act has been used 3 times in the past, each time during a major conflict. The first time it was used was during the War of 1812, Most recently, it was used in World War II. The law is best known for its role in Japanese internment camps during World War II. Why does Trump want to enact the law? The Trump administration said it wants to use the law to speed up the deportation of alleged Venezuelan Tren de Aragua members. That's a gang, a notorious, brutal gang from Venezuela. President Trump said the gang is engaging in, quote, mass illegal immigration to further the gang's effort to hurt Americans. Trump previously labeled the gang a terrorist group in late February. Now let's look at what this judge did to block, and why this judge says that Trump's proclamation, at least up until this point, should be blocked. Chief U.S. District Judge James Boasberg in Washington, D.C., granted a temporary restraining order on Saturday, March 15th, a couple days ago from the time of this recording. He ordered the government to not deport 5 Venezuelan nationals. The ruling came after 2 nonprofits, including the American Civil Liberties Union, filed a lawsuit. During a hearing on Saturday night, the judge turned the lawsuit into a class action. He also extended the temporary restraining order to all non-citizens in the U.S. covered in Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act. Boasberg will have an additional hearing on the matter on March 17th. There's supposed to be an additional hearing at 4 p.m. That's Monday, March 17th. What have Trump allies said? Texas Republican Rep. Brandon Gill said in a post on X that he will be filing to impeach Boasberg. Elon Musk reposted the tweet and said, quote, it was necessary. And you see here the congressman from Texas screenshotting a New York Post article there, and then saying essentially, I'm going to file to have this judge impeached. Attorney General Pam Bondi said the Boasberg order disregards Trump's authority as president and puts authorities and Americans at risk. This order, quote, this is a quote, this order disregards well-established authority regarding President Trump's power, and it puts the public and law enforcement at risk, Pam Bondi said. However, Boasberg said his order doesn't hurt the government. He said it's only a slight delay to their plans. I do not believe I can wait any longer and am required to act. A brief delay in the removal does not cause government any harm, Boasberg said. Now, Despite the plane carrying more than 250 continued on to El Salvador, despite this order, essentially take a pause to that. Let's look at this. And you using this act, and the Trump administration has said, hey, we're going to take this to the Supreme Court essentially and fight this out. Again, the Trump administration believes that this is taking dangerous people out of the country under this act, and that act allows the president to do this unilaterally, trying to get the word out, without a court's involvement, and without, quote unquote, as the other side is saying, going through the judicial process, due process. The argument is essentially that, they don't have due process. It's the argument from the Trump camp. Here's Trump responding when asked about this from a reporter. I believe this was on Air Force One. Let's look at that.
Criticism that the Alien Enemies Act has only been invoked 3 other times. They were all during times of war. Do you feel that you're using it appropriately right now?
Well, this is a time of war because Biden allowed millions of people, many of them criminals, many of them at the highest level. They emptied jails out. Other nations emptied their jails into the United States. That's an invasion. And these are criminals, many, many criminals, murderers, drug dealers at the highest level, drug lords, people from mental institutions. That's an invasion. They invaded our country. So this isn't, in that sense, this is war.
So that is the Trump administration's response, if you will, to that directly from President Trump. And again, the press secretary, and I'll read a part of it, said this in response to an article written by Axios. Axios reported that the White House, and I'll read this to you. Axios reported that the White House says it ignored a court order to turn around 2 plane loads of alleged Venezuelan gang members because the flights were over international waters, and therefore the ruling didn't apply, 2 senior officials told Axios. The administration responded this way. This is coming from Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary. She said the administration did not refuse to comply with the court order. The order, which had no lawful basis, was issued after terrorist TDA aliens had already been removed from U.S. territory. This is, again, the White House press secretary writing this. The written order and the administration's actions do not conflict. Moreover, as the Supreme Court has repeatedly made clear, the federal courts generally have no jurisdiction over the president's conduct of foreign affairs. His authorities under the Alien Enemies Act and his core Article 2 powers to remove foreign alien terrorists from U.S. soil and repel a declared invasion. A single judge in a single city cannot direct the movements of an aircraft carrying foreign alien terrorists, words of the White House press secretary, who were physically expelled from U.S. soil. So Trump administration is taking a very strong position on this as it plays out in the courts. Let's go to our next story here. Our next story has to do with the pro-Palestinian college protests that are ongoing on college campuses here. DHS has announced another arrest of a second protester connected to these campus protests. Let's look at this story once again from Straight Arrow News. DHS announced a second arrest in connection to campus protest. Let's look at the full story here. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, announced the arrest of a second Columbia University student allegedly involved in pro-Palestinian protest on campus last spring. Meanwhile, another student self-deported after her visa was revoked for similarly participating in protest. Federal immigration officers, let me just say as a news person, I wish they could write this differently. But anyway, federal immigration officers took Liqua Cordia, and I may be mispronouncing that, Liqua Cordia, a Palestinian from the West Bank, into custody after she overstayed her F1 visa, which expired in January of 2022, according to the agency. Officers also arrested her for, quote, her involvement in pro-Hamas protest at Columbia University in New York City. Cordia previously had been arrested in 2024 for her involvement in the spring pro-Palestinian protest at Columbia. The second student, Rahan Srinivasan, an Indian citizen, quote, was involved in activity supporting Hamas, a terrorist organization, according to DHS. Earlier this month, DHS revoked her visa. Officials later provided video surveillance of Srinivasan using the CBP Home app to self-deport on March 11th. In a statement, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem said, "It is a privilege to be granted a visa to live and study in the United States of America. When you advocate for violence and terrorism, that privilege should be revoked, and you should not be in this country. I'm glad to see one of Columbia University terrorist sympathizers use the CBP Home app to self-deport." Protests continued on Columbia's campus Friday, March 14th. And they've been going on for a few weeks at this point now, really. They occurred hours after DHS agents entered two student dorm rooms on campus the night before. The big thing, or I guess you could say argument or conversation that's coming out of this is, what right, if any at all, do these people have? Where do you draw the fine line between free speech and enforcing immigration law, particularly as it concerns the role of the Secretary of State, and as you see here, that being involved is DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. When does the line of free speech, when does that line no longer exist, and you're now engaging in support of what the U.S. government has declared an enemy, or what the U.S. government has declared a terrorist organization, as they have done in the case of Hamas? That is the story there, and that is the conversation that's being had at this point, given this and Khalid, another person that's actually legally going through the courts, and they're attempting to deport. They're going through the Khalid Muhammad, I believe is his name. They're going through the process of looking at him as well, in the sense that, when does your free speech begin to no longer be, when can you no longer claim free speech? When are you actively aiding and abetting what the U.S. government has deemed an enemy? That's the conversation that's being had here. And on both sides, in terms of political affiliations, they're both sides having both arguments on each side. Democrats, some are for it, some are against it. Republicans, some are for it, some are against it. Some are saying it's a crackdown on free speech. Some say this has nothing to do with free speech. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see this play out in the courts, this story, and really the story about Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan gang, and the alleged people that were deported, a part of that gang, allegedly a part of that gang. The question becomes, when it becomes deemed a national security threat in the eyes of the executive branch, when and what power do they have? Really is the big question that's being asked, I think, in these two stories. Those campus protests are continuing at Columbia, spreading out in a smaller way on other college campuses, but really in a big way on Columbia's campus. All right, this is the next story, and we're going to be tracking, following all of those things on the federal level. This next story for me is personal, and I'll just be out front and say that. It's the killing of Pastor Ricky Floyd out of Memphis, Tennessee. The story is heartbreaking, and it was shocking when I got the news. The man, in a way, was a mentor to me, and the manner in which he died, which we'll get into, jarred me, shocked me, and really had me thinking about the brevity of life, and how short it can be. It feels long, but it's really short. I'm still processing it. He's actually supposed to be on my podcast, but it's surreal in a way. To have his life taken in that manner is shocking. He helped a lot of people, and to see his life just taken in that way is heartbreaking. It is truly heartbreaking. I want to start by sharing a report from a local news station, sharing a little bit about the case and what happened. And then I'll get into a bit more, and then I'll share some more of my thoughts.
Breaking news on your news leader at 4 today. We're learning more about what may have happened to a well-known pastor who died in the streets of Memphis early this morning. Pastor Ricky Floyd was shot and killed outside a South Memphis bar and kitchen. Thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm Alex Coleman.
And I'm April Thompson. We're just getting information in from police this afternoon. An affidavit says 3 people, including a woman who is now charged, got into an argument with Pastor Floyd. It goes on to say that a video from Mama's Bar and Kitchen shows Floyd threw the suspect's phone to the ground along with the beer can.
Now, police say he started to drive away but got out and walked toward her. Then she reportedly moved toward Floyd, and that's when police say he walked backwards away from her and then fell to the ground. Of course, this has all sent shockwaves all across Memphis and the Mid-South.
Indeed, those in the community as well as other pastors are responding hours after learning the man who preached nonviolence is one of the city's latest victims of violence.
Crime scene tape blowing violently in the wind marks the spot where a violent attack happened overnight. It was just after 1 a.m. when police were called here to Mama's Bar and Kitchen at the corner of Kentucky Street and E.H. Crump Boulevard. Listen as dispatch relays information from Broadcastify.
It was involving a female shooting a male who was constantly approaching her in an aggressive manner.
Police, along with other first responders, soon arrived, but there was nothing they could do. This ambulance sat idle as the man shot was never rushed away from the scene. Instead, this is where he was pronounced dead. The victim, we learned, is Pastor Ricky Floyd, the senior lead pastor of Pursuit of God Transformation Center in Fraser.
I don't know what.
Let's stop there for a second. It's heartbreaking. It's tragic. I'm still kind of at a loss for words watching this, and although I watched the story before, watching it again, the man dedicated his life to preaching, teaching, as that reporter said in the story, nonviolence. He did all he could to intervene, particularly young men in the Memphis community. To give them a different path, to teach them to aim up and high and go beyond their circumstance. He, through his ministry and his life, and I had the privilege of knowing him for a few years, he took blighted, abandoned buildings and built a thrift store. He took property that people forgot about and began to build, in a way, a mini compound of resource for people in a community of Memphis known as Fraser. And he was doing so many good things in the community. And here's the key thing. Here's the key thing about it. So many preachers, hear me what I say. So many preachers, they talk a good game. You know, they say all the good things in the pulpit and behind the podium that you think they should say. But after Sunday morning, you don't see them again to maybe Bible study, and then again on Sunday morning. But this man, you saw him throughout the week, involved, dealing with multiple levels of government on a local level, working within the government structures to leverage resources to help people. That's what he did. Always gracious to me. I remember being a reporter in Memphis, and I'm dedicating this portion of the podcast to that because it's important. I remember being a reporter in Memphis, long days in Memphis. And in this business now, you MMJ, which is short for multimedia journalist or multi-skill journalist, where you essentially write, edit, shoot, and do all of it to put your story together yourself, right? I remember those long days, and I would go, and he may be a part of my story that day, and I'll go interview him, talk to him, maybe not interview him, but he'll connect me with someone to talk to, or he knew someone that could interview or could speak to something, and he'll connect us. And he would always have an open door policy with me. You want something to drink, you're thirsty, you want some food, and he's literally fed me when I needed it. he's offered his church to me. I remember I first got to Memphis, and I was introduced to him by another reporter who had known for a while. And one of the first things out of his mouth to me, a guy he didn't know, all he knew was some guy that just moved to Memphis to work at a station here. But he offered to me his church. And he said, anytime you need a workspace, it's available to you. Just let me know. He always joked about how I dressed, and he had this, I won't call it a thrift store. I call it, it was more than just a thrift store, because there was new stuff, there was old stuff, but he just wanted me to get a suit from his store, and so many other things, a hat and all this stuff. And he tried like 4 or 5 different jackets on me, and none of them fit. They were all too big. And he says, when I get something for you, I'm gonna let you know. It's just so much good that this man did. And there's a song in the Christian faith. I'll look it up here. There's a song that we sing. It's an old hymn that we sing in the Christian faith that I think it rang out in me when this happened. It says, tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long. While there are others living about us, never molested or never, hurt or never harmed is what that term means. An old English word. It doesn't mean, it's not sexual. Though in the wrong, they never go through anything. While there are others living about us, essentially is what this line is saying. While others are living and they never do any, they never, they do all the wrong. They do all the wrong in the world, but they never go through anything really. They're never harmed. While death has come and taken our loved ones, it leaves our homes so lonely and dreary. Then do we wonder why others prosper, living so wicked year after year. Farther along, we'll know all about it. Farther along, we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother. Live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. Faithful to death, said our loving master, a few more days to labor and wait. Toils of the road will then seem as nothing as we sweep through the beautiful gates. Farther along, we'll know all about it. Yes, we'll understand it all by and by. The man, Pastor Ricky Floyd, was a man among men. He was a light in what seemed like an impenetrable darkness that sometimes attempted to engulf the beautiful city of Memphis. He was a helper. He was a giver. He was a support. He was a backbone for a community known in the Memphis area as Fraser that didn't have many resources. As I mentioned, he tried to provide and fill the gap. I don't have the words. I don't understand it. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. But as the song Farther Along lets us know, we'll understand it better by and by. It has seemed the wicked prosper and they get away with it. But that's not necessarily the case, and that's not necessarily true. He was a father. He was a grandfather. He was a pastor. And a father to many others who are not or were not his biological children. The man gave of his life, literally. And as that reporter said in that story, a man who so eloquently and passionately fought against violence lost his life in a very violent way. I think it's a great loss to the kingdom of God. I think it's a great loss to this country. I think it's a great loss to the city of Memphis. I don't understand it, but he did so much good. If I can do just 1/10 of what he did for Memphis, I would have done okay. He could have left Memphis. He could have went off and did whatever, but he stayed in Fraser helping that community. And I'll say this too. I remember I was working on a story, something to do with drug addiction. And that's when he offered me a plate of fried catfish. It was good too. And I was on a story and I interviewed a guy in that Memphis accent, right? Interviewing him. And he was telling me his story. And he got to the point where his life was down and out, and he was on drugs. He didn't know what to do. He was an ex-convict, couldn't get any opportunity, couldn't get any chance. But he was able. Pastor Ricky Floyd gave him opportunity to serve the church. I believe he was either the janitor or a maintenance person or something at the church, the Pursuit of God Church in Memphis. And he talked about how Pastor Ricky Floyd gave him opportunity when no one else would. That's what it means to be a shepherd. That's what it means to be a leader. That's what it means to do good. That's what it means. Let's go back to watching.
To say a pastor would be slaughtered. It's just rare, and I guess it's rare, but it seems to be an occurrence that's happening more often.
A manager here at Mama's Bar and Kitchen told us off camera this did not happen inside the establishment. They're also telling us it happened once they closed up. She wanted to make that clear. However, what's unclear is what prompted the deadly shooting. A source with first-hand knowledge of the case says there was a dispute between Pastor Floyd and a woman later identified as Samantha Marion. The source goes on to say the pastor threw her phone before things spilled into the streets and then spiraled out of control, ending with Samantha Marion allegedly shooting and killing the pastor. She has since been charged with voluntary manslaughter, a killing in which someone is said to have acted in the heat of passion. While police continue piecing together what happened, there's a community far and wide grappling with grief.
To all of those in Memphis and Shelby County and throughout the country and throughout the world that had the chance to encounter this brother's life and ministry. So it's definitely a time to mourn.
For your news leader in South Memphis, Jarita Patterson, WREG, News Channel 3.
Wow. Crazy story there. Crazy story. Let's look at this story, given a bit more about the background. This is from Fox 13 in Memphis. A judicial commissioner ruled Friday, and those are the ones who deal with bond in Memphis. A judicial commissioner ruled Friday that the bond given to a woman accused of killing Memphis pastor Ricky Floyd will not decrease. Samantha Marion appeared before Judicial Commissioner John Marshall on Friday. Marion's attorney John Keith Perry and Kevin Macy argued that Marion should be given a lower bond because she has 4 children and is the sole provider to 2 of them. Prosecutors, however, rebutted that Marion's $100,000 bond, which you only have to pay 10%, so that's about $10,000. The prosecutors rebutted that Marion's $100,000 bond should remain in place because of the likelihood of conviction and the surveillance video showing the altercation between Marion and Floyd on the night of the deadly shooting. She's a hardworking single mother, loves her family, loves her children, Massey said. Marion's attorneys also argued that she acted in self-defense. That's the argument that they're going with here. In our mind, there's no way it should end up with any sort of conviction. We think this is a classic self-defense case, her attorney said. But prosecutors painted a different picture. Prosecutor Missy Bryan argued that Marion could have left the confrontation, but instead grabbed a gun. She goes to her car. She doesn't get in. She doesn't drive off. She retrieves the gun and conceals it behind her back, Braham said. Ultimately, Marshall sided with the prosecution. That's the judge. This is just a sad and horrible tragic event all the way around for Mr. Floyd's family, for Marion's family, for Miss Marion personally, Marshall, the judge said. After Marion's Friday court appearance, Perry and Matt Macy told Fox 13 that Marion and Floyd did not know each other prior to their deadly altercation. This is a person she had never met before. The information about her following him with some video is totally inaccurate. So there was a claim, or there were claims that she was recording him and began following him. Her lawyers say that's inaccurate. Marion, 42, she's 42 years old, faces a charge of voluntary manslaughter for Floyd's death, which happened around 1 a.m. outside Mama's Bar and Grill at the intersection of Crump and Kentucky Street on March 12th. Court records claim that Marion and Floyd had an argument inside the venue, as mentioned in that report. That argument continued outside the bar and restaurant and saw Floyd throw Marion's phone and a beer can before driving away. According to Marion's arrest affidavit, the Memphis Police Department said Marion then stood in front of Floyd's car, leading Floyd to get out of his vehicle and continue the altercation. Eventually, according to police, Marion began walking toward Floyd as he backed away. Soon after, Floyd fell to the ground and remained there. He died at the scene. Involuntary manslaughter, the charge Marion faces, carries a prison sentence of between 8 and 12 years. It's a tragedy. It is a tragedy among tragedies, and my heart goes out to Pastor Floyd's family. He was a pastor that did what a pastor does, supposed to do. And I'll say it again, he didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk. He gave of himself, of his resources to help others. And it was an honor to know him. I'm grateful I got a chance to know him. My prayers are with his family. Rest well, sir. Thank y'all for watching. Thank y'all for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, and share if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening, wherever you get your podcast, please subscribe and share there as well. Tell others about this podcast, The Weekly Brief, or tell others about my long-form talk interview podcast, Jay Shakur Uncensored. Thank you for watching.